My name is Daniel Croft. For 44 years, I'd built my life on a foundation of what I believed were unshakable truths. That hard work was its own reward, that a man's word was his bond, and that love, once found, was worth more than any fortune. For 8 years, I thought I had proven those truths. I was wrong. I was a construction project manager in Tampa, a good, solid job that paid $82,000 a year. It was honest work. I managed crews, wrangled subcontractors, wrestled with budgets and timelines, and took pride in seeing a raw piece of land transform into a building where people would live and work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My wife was Isabella Rossi. To call her beautiful would be like calling the ocean wet. It was a fact, but it failed to capture her essence. She had this dark, fiery Italian elegance with eyes the color of rich espresso and a laugh that could make you forget a bad day. She was also ambitious, sharp, and came from a world I could only ever visit. The Rossis were old Tampa Bay money, not the flashy new tech wealth, but the quiet, formidable kind that built shipping empires, owned downtown office towers, and whose name was on the wing of the local art museum. Her father, Antonio Rossi, was a patriarch straight out of a Gothic novel, proud, imposing, and fiercely protective of his family's legacy. He never thought I was good enough for his Isabella. He made that clear from the moment I picked her up for our first date in my dependable, slightly dusty Ford F-150. The look he gave me from the grand portico of their Bayside mansion was one of pure, unadulterated disdain. I was a laborer, a blue-collar man with calloused hands, and in his world, people like me built the foundations for people like him to stand upon. When we got engaged, the prenuptial agreement was not a suggestion, it was a decree. The meeting took place in a law firm so high up in a downtown skyscraper you could watch the sailboats on the bay like tiny white specks. The air smelled of expensive leather and old money. Antonio, flanked by his lawyer, a severe man named Mr. Thornton, did the talking. Isabella sat beside me, clutching my hand, her knuckles white. "Daniel," Antonio began, his voice a low rumble. "This is not a reflection on you personally. It is business. The Rossi assets, the family trusts, the holdings, they must be protected for future generations. You understand?" I did understand. I understood that I was being bought off before I'd even tried to take anything. The document was thick, impenetrable with legalese. Thornton walked me through it, his tone implying I was too simple to grasp its complexities. The gist was simple. What was theirs remained theirs. What was mine, a paltry sum by comparison, remained mine. Anything we built together during our marriage would be split equitably. It seemed fair enough on the surface. I was a proud man. I didn't want their money. I wanted Isabella. So with a heart full of love and a head full of foolish optimism, I signed on the dotted line. Love, as I would later learn, makes you do dangerously stupid things. For 8 years, our marriage was, against all odds, a happy one. We lived in a charming, slightly quirky bungalow in the historic Hyde Park neighborhood, a world away from the cold perfection of their parents' estate. Isabella worked part-time at a high-end art gallery in Ybor City, not for the money, she earned a token $28,000, but for the passion. She had an eye for talent and loved the world of artists and collectors. We were a team. We talked about starting a family, about maybe one day buying a bigger place with a yard for the kids and a dog. We were normal. We were happy. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday morning in September, the universe decided to rearrange the pieces of our lives with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Isabella, like her superstitious grandmother, had played the same set of lottery numbers for years, a sequence based on family birthdays and the date her grandparents immigrated to America. "Someday, Danny," she'd say with a wink, waving the little slip of paper, "these numbers are going to change our lives." That Wednesday, they did. The Florida Lotto jackpot, $15 million. After federal taxes, and with Florida's blessedly absent state tax on winnings, it came to a cool $9.75 million.
I was in the kitchen pouring my second cup of coffee when I heard a sound from the living room that was half scream, half sob. I rushed in to find Isabella standing frozen, her phone in one hand, a crumpled lottery ticket in the other, her face a mask of utter disbelief. "Danny!" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, Danny!" She showed me the ticket, then her phone screen, which displayed the winning numbers. They matched, perfectly. For a full minute, we just stared at each other. Then the dam broke. She started screaming, laughing, crying all at once, jumping into my arms. "We're rich! We're actually rich!" she shrieked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. For about 20 glorious minutes, I floated on a cloud of pure, unadulterated joy. Our dreams, the bigger house, the kids, the financial security, the freedom, were no longer dreams. They were a check away from being reality. That evening, the Rossi family descended upon our modest bungalow like a well-dressed swarm of locusts. Antonio and his wife Eleanor arrived first, Eleanor's perfume filling the small space with the scent of gardenias and old wealth. They were followed by Isabella's older brother, Marco, a smug financial analyst who had never missed an opportunity to remind me of my unrefined career path, and her aunt, the perpetually disapproving Contessa Maria. They brought champagne, Dom Perignon, of course, and an air of ownership that immediately suffocated our earlier private joy. Glasses were clinked, toasts were made to Isabella's incredible luck, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. The way Antonio clapped me on the back was a little too hard. The way Marco's eyes lingered on me was a little too calculating. Isabella, who had been clinging to me just hours before, was now holding court with her family, the center of their universe once more. She seemed different, her laughter a pitch too high, her gestures more dramatic. A cold, hard knot began to form in my stomach.
Over the next few days, the chill settled in. Isabella started taking long, private calls, retreating to our home office or the backyard, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. When I tried to join the conversation, she'd cover the phone and give me a tight smile. "Just family stuff, Danny. Boring financial planning." When I broached the subject of what we should do with the money, pay off the mortgage, invest, maybe take a dream vacation to Italy, she became evasive, almost dismissive. "We need to be smart about this, Daniel," she said, using my full name in a way that felt foreign and cold. "My father knows the best wealth managers. We can't just fritter it away. We have to protect it." "Protect it from what?" I asked, an edge creeping into my voice. "From us? From our life together?" "From everything," she replied, vaguely, turning away. "You just don't understand these things." 3 weeks after the win, on a cool October morning, the other shoe dropped. Isabella asked me to sit down in the living room. She was wearing a severe black business dress, one I'd never seen before. It was then I noticed Antonio and Eleanor were already there, seated on our sofa like a tribunal. Marco leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Daniel," Isabella began, her voice flat and rehearsed, "we need to discuss our situation." Antonio leaned forward, taking over as he always did. "Son," he said, and the word felt like an insult. "This windfall changes the landscape considerably. Isabella's fortune needs to be managed and protected with the utmost care." "Our fortune," I corrected, my voice steady despite the roaring in my ears. "We're married. It belongs to both of us." The silence that followed was heavy and profound. Eleanor looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. Marco's smirk widened. Isabella took a sharp breath. "Actually, Daniel, that's not how this works. I won the lottery. I picked the numbers. I bought the ticket. It's my separate property." The words hit me with physical force. "What are you saying, Isabella?" Her eyes, those beautiful espresso eyes I had loved for so long, were now hard and distant. "I'm saying I think we need some time apart. I want a divorce." The room seemed to tilt. "A divorce?" The word was ash in my mouth. "And," Antonio interjected, his voice dripping with finality, "we need you to move out today. The prenuptial agreement you signed is very clear. This windfall is Isabella's separate property. You have no claim to it." "I see," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I stood up, my legs feeling like wood. "So this is what it was always about. The prenup was never about protecting the family from me. It was about keeping me in my place. Don't be dramatic, Daniel. This is just the way it has to be." "Fine," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "I'll get my things." The relief on their faces was the final, searing betrayal. They thought I was the simple, uncomplicated construction worker, that I would bow my head and accept my exile. They had no idea that they had just awakened a different man entirely. They had just signed their own financial death warrant, and they'd used their own precious prenup as the pen. I moved into a soulless residence inn near the airport that night. The room smelled of stale air and industrial cleaner. I sat on the edge of the bed, the hum of the air conditioner a dull roar in my ears. But I didn't cry. I didn't break. A cold, focused fury was building inside me, a foundation more solid than any concrete slab I had ever poured. The next morning, I made a call. Not to a friend for sympathy, not to a family member for support. I called a lawyer. But not just any lawyer. I called Sarah Jenkins of Jenkins and Valdez, arguably the most feared and respected divorce attorney in the state of Florida. I had heard her name mentioned in hushed, reverent tones by a subcontractor who had gone through a brutal custody battle against a billionaire ex-wife. He said, "She's a pit bull in a pinstripe suit. She eviscerated them." Her consultation fee was $750. I put it on my credit card. Her office was in a modern, glass-walled building in Channelside, a world away from the old money opulence of Antonio's lawyer. Sarah Jenkins herself was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, a no-nonsense gray bob, and a handshake that could crack walnuts. "Mr. Croft," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "Tell me everything, and don't leave out a single detail." I did. I told her about the marriage, the Rossis, the prenup, the lottery win, the cold dismissal. I handed her my copy of the prenuptial agreement. She read it, her eyes scanning the pages with the speed and intensity of a predator. She didn't just read the words, she seemed to be dissecting the intent behind them. When she finished, she looked up and a slow, deliberate smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a chess master who has just seen her opponent's fatal mistake. "Daniel," she said, leaning forward, "this is beautiful." "Beautiful," I echoed, confused. "Section 4.2, she said, tapping the page. "Read it." I looked where she pointed. "Any assets, prizes, awards, or winnings of any kind acquired by either party during the term of the marriage, regardless of the source, shall be considered marital property, subject to equitable distribution upon dissolution."
They said lottery winnings are personal property in Florida, I said. And generally they can be, Sarah explained. But a contract is a contract. The Rossi family, in their infinite wisdom and paranoia, wanted to make sure that if you, say, won a car in a radio station contest or hit a small jackpot at the Hard Rock Casino, it would be considered a marital asset, presumably so Isabella could claim half. They were so determined to close every possible loophole that might benefit you, they accidentally left the biggest one wide open. They defined any winnings of any kind as marital property. They tied their own hands. So, you're saying, I'm saying, Daniel, that according to the very document they forced you to sign to protect themselves, that $9.75 million is marital property. You are entitled to an equitable share, which, in a marriage of this length, with no children, is almost certainly half. A wave of vindication, cold and clean, washed over me. Half, I repeated, the word tasting like justice. Potentially, yes, Sarah cautioned, but they are not going to roll over. They have resources, and they will hire a legal war machine. This will be ugly, expensive, and emotionally draining. My retainer is $25,000. I didn't flinch. I had about $18,000 in my savings and borrowed the rest against my 401k. It was the easiest financial decision I had ever made.
I was investing in my own liberation. As Sarah predicted, the Rossis came out swinging. They hired Bradley the Barracuda Morrison, a lawyer so notoriously aggressive and expensive that he was a legend in his own right. His hourly rate was said to be over $1,000. His first letter arrived at my motel room within a week, a thick, heavy envelope containing a blizzard of legal threats. It demanded I, quote, immediately cease and desist from any and all claims to the separate property of Miss Rossi, and threatened to sue me for legal fees and malicious prosecution if I persisted. They saw me as a gnat to be swatted away. They underestimated the resolve of a man who had spent his life building things, who knew how to read complex blueprints and manage multi-million-dollar projects. I was not out of my depth. I was in my element. This was just another project. The project of my life. Sarah and I began our methodical, painstaking work. We subpoenaed bank records, credit card statements, everything. We discovered that Isabella had, for years, been buying her lottery tickets from the same Circle K on Bayshore Boulevard, and she had almost always used our joint checking account at Chase Bank to do so. The winning ticket, purchased on a Tuesday afternoon, was paid for with a debit transaction from that very account. But the real masterstroke, Sarah said during one of our strategy sessions, is Florida Statute 61.75. It explicitly states that assets acquired during the marriage are presumed marital, and your prenup doesn't just align with that statute, it reinforces it with a sledgehammer. They can't argue against the statute without invalidating their own agreement. Meanwhile, Isabella was living a very public life of sudden, extravagant wealth. Her Instagram, once filled with tasteful photos of art exhibits and our dinners out, was now a relentless parade of luxury. There was the brand new Porsche 911 Carrera, price tag $112,000. There were shopping sprees at International Plaza, bags from Gucci, Chanel, and Louis Vuitton piled high. There was the contract she'd signed on a stunning, ultra-modern waterfront mansion in the exclusive community of Avila, with a non-refundable deposit of $500,000. Every post was a nail in her legal coffin, evidence of her commingling this separate asset with our marital lifestyle. The divorce proceedings officially began in January. The first hearing was held in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom in the Hillsborough County's courthouse. Morrison was exactly as advertised, a tall, silver-haired man in a suit that probably cost more than my truck, oozing condescension. He swaggered up to the bench, oozing confidence. Your Honor, this is a simple case of opportunism. Mr. Croft is attempting to lay a claim to a fortune that he had absolutely no hand in creating. My client selected the numbers. My client purchased the ticket. It was her intuition, her luck. The prenuptial agreement, while thorough, was never intended to cover a fantastical, unforeseeable windfall of this magnitude. It was meant for minor prizes and awards. Judge Anya Sharma, a woman with a reputation for intellectual rigor and a low tolerance for nonsense, listened impassively. Sarah stood, calm and collected. Your Honor, with all due respect to Mr. Morrison, the law and the contract are both perfectly clear. The prenuptial agreement states any winnings of any kind. It does not say any winnings except really, really big ones. Furthermore, the ticket was purchased with funds from a joint marital account, a pattern of spending that has been established for years. This is not a separate asset. It is the quintessential marital asset. Judge Anya Sharma requested copies of all filings and the prenup for her review. I'm adjourning this hearing for 2 weeks. I will have a decision on the preliminary motions then. The Rossi family's confidence seemed to crack just a little as we left the courtroom. I saw Antonio gripping Isabella's arm, his face a thundercloud. The first settlement offer came a few days later. Antonio himself called me. "Daniel, let's stop this foolishness," he said, his voice strained. "We are prepared to offer you $1 million, cash. You walk away, and we never have to speak of this again." "I'll consider it," I said, and hung up. The next day, Isabella came to the Residence Inn. She looked hollowed out. The glamour of her new life was replaced by a brittle anxiety. The constant partying and the stress of the lawsuit were taking their toll. "Daniel, please," Isabella begged, her voice breaking. "We can end this now. I was scared, okay? The money. It changed everything. My family, they pressured me. Scared of what, Isabella? Of sharing our good fortune? I'll give you $3 million. $3 million tax-free. You can start over. You can have your own company. Please, just let this go. I looked at this woman, the stranger who had taken the place of my wife. I felt a profound sadness, but no pity. The time for pity was long past. It was never about the money for me, Isabella, I said quietly. It was about being treated like a partner, not a problem to be disposed of. The answer is no. The discovery process was a bloodbath for their case. Sarah's legal team meticulously documented every dollar Isabella had spent from the lottery winnings, proving she had thoroughly commingled the asset with marital funds. She had paid off the remaining $85,000 on our joint mortgage. She had used the lottery account to pay for a lavish birthday party for her father at the Tampa Club. And she had even transferred $200,000 into a joint investment account we had opened years ago. But the fatal blow came from Morrison's own arrogance. In his initial hastily filed motion to dismiss my claim back in October, he had written, "The asset in question, while purchased during the marriage, is the separate and sole property of Miss Rossi."
Sarah pounced on it in a subsequent deposition. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice sweet as poison, "in your motion of October 28th, you stated the winning ticket was purchased during the marriage. Can you read that line for the record?" Morrison, flustered, tried to backtrack. "That was a general statement. The source of the funds is the critical issue." "But you acknowledge it was purchased during the marriage. The act that created this multi-million-dollar asset occurred while Daniel and Isabella Croft were husband and wife?" "Yes, but—" No further questions. She had trapped him with his own words. He had inadvertently strengthened our strongest argument. The final hearing was set for mid-April. The air in Tampa was growing thick with humidity and anticipation. The Rossis, in their desperation, hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me. He found nothing but a man who paid his taxes on time, volunteered with a local Habitat for Humanity chapter, and whose biggest vice was an occasional beer with his crew after work. They tried to float allegations of emotional abuse, but Isabella's own social media posts, filled with happy, loving captions about me right up until the week of the lottery win, completely undermined her fabricated testimony. 2 days before the trial, Morrison offered $4.8 million. "It's a very strong offer, Daniel. Going to trial is always a gamble. A judge can be unpredictable." I shook my head. "This stopped being about the money a long time ago, Sarah. This is about holding them accountable to their own words. We see it through." The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep. I thought about the prenup, that document designed to be a wall between me and the Rossi fortune. They had built that wall themselves, and now they were trapped on the wrong side of it, watching as I, the simple construction worker, use their own blueprint to dismantle it, brick by brick. The morning of April 17th was bright and clear. I wore the same suit I'd worn to my wedding. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The courtroom was packed. The story, construction worker battles socialite for lottery millions, had captured the local media's imagination. The Rossi family sat at their table, a united front of tailored misery. Isabella looked pale and drawn. Antonio's jaw was clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. Morrison was whispering furiously to them. Judge Sharma entered, and the room fell silent. "We are here on the matter of Croft versus Rossi Croft. Mr. Morrison, your opening statement." Morrison gave it his all, weaving a narrative of a greedy husband exploiting a legal technicality to steal his wife's rightful property. He spoke of luck and intuition and separate endeavor. But the bluster was gone. He was fighting a defensive battle, and he knew it. When Sarah stood, she was the picture of calm authority. "Your Honor, this case is not about luck or intuition. It is about contract law. The parties entered into a binding prenuptial agreement. That agreement defines the rules of their marital finance. The defendants now ask this court to ignore those rules because they find the outcome inconvenient. The law does not work that way. The contract does not work that way." The evidence phase was a methodical dismantling of their defense.
Sarah presented the bank records, the debit card receipt from the Circle K, the records of years of lottery ticket purchases. She presented Isabella's social media posts and financial statements, illustrating the rampant commingling of assets. Then she delivered the coup de grace. Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence Defendant's Exhibit B, the motion to dismiss filed by Mr. Morrison. She read the damning line aloud. Purchased during the marriage. She looked at Morrison. Even opposing counsel acknowledges the foundational fact of our case. Judge Sharma called for a recess to review the evidence. The hallway tension was palpable. Antonio Rossi stormed past me muttering in Italian. Isabella wouldn't meet my gaze. When we reconvened, Judge Sharma did not mince words. After review of the prenuptial agreement, Florida Statute 61.75, and all submitted evidence, the court finds the language of the contract to be unambiguous. Section 4.2 explicitly includes any winnings of any kind as marital property. The defendant's actions following the win, including the deposition of funds into accounts used for marital expenses and the payment of marital debts, further demonstrate a treatment of this asset consistent with marital property. The motion to limit Mr. Croft's claim is denied. The lottery winnings are declared a marital asset. A gasp went through the courtroom. Isabella let out a small, choked cry. Judge Sharma continued. Given the length of the marriage, the contributions of both parties, and the lack of dependent children, the court finds an equal distribution to be equitable. Ms. Rossi Croft is ordered to pay Mr. Croft the sum of $4,875,000 within 90 days. Should liquidation of assets be required, so be it. The gavel fell. It was over. Outside, under the relentless Florida sun, reporters shouted questions. One stuck a microphone in my face. "Mr. Croft, how do you feel? Is this a victory for the little guy?" I looked at the camera, my mind clear for the first time in months. I said, "It's a victory for a signed contract. It's a victory for keeping your word." The aftermath was a symphony of schadenfreude. Isabella had to sell the Porsche, forfeit the deposit on the Avila mansion, and liquidate her entire collection of designer goods at a fraction of their value. The Rossi family fortune wasn't destroyed, but their pride was shattered. They became a cautionary tale in their own social circles. As for me, I took my settlement and, true to my word, started Croft & Son Construction. The son was a hopeful nod to the future. I focused on quality, affordable housing, treating my employees with respect and my clients with honesty. The business flourished. I heard through the grapevine that Isabella was now working as a consultant for her father's shipping company, living in a small condo paid for by her parents. The golden cage she had chosen was still a cage. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't about inflicting pain. It's about reclaiming your dignity. It's about watching those who wronged you stumble under the weight of their own arrogance. The Rossis had tried to use their wealth as a weapon to diminish me. In the end, they simply handed me the ammunition. All I had to do was have the courage to pull the trigger.